Friday nights were supposed to be my downtime, especially after a grueling week dealing with delayed flights and maintenance issues at the airport. As an ANP mechanic and crew chief at United Airlines for over 25 years, I'd earned my moments of peace. But peace isn't exactly what I found when I walked into my house that night. I pulled my F-250 into the garage and killed the engine. Judith's Lincoln Navigator was in its usual spot. Good. Maybe she hadn't cooked up one of her last-minute hospital charity events or yoga retreats. All I wanted was a steak, a cold beer, and maybe my wife in that little robe she knew I loved. The house was unusually quiet as I stepped inside. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and rifled through the stack of mail. Bills, a coupon book, some random hospital correspondence with Judith's name on it. The usual. Then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Light, hurried. A second later, there she was, standing in the living room, wearing that robe. The one I'd bought her for our anniversary. "Oh," she said, a little too surprised. "You're early." "Not that early," I replied, glancing at my watch. "What's going on?" She hesitated, then gestured toward a small overnight bag sitting by the couch. "I'm, going out. With a friend. For the weekend." My stomach tightened. "What friend? Where?" Her face flushed, but she tried to play it cool. "William. From work. We're heading out of town. Just for the weekend. William. As in Dr. William Strathmore. The pediatric surgeon with a slippery charm and the kind of face that belongs on a cologne ad. The same William I'd met at the hospital's Christmas party, where he'd spent more time eyeing Judith than his own wife. I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "You're going on a weekend trip with another man? And you think I'm supposed to be fine with this?" "I need some space, David," she snapped, folding her arms defensively. "We'll talk about this when I get back." "Like hell we will." She huffed, turned on her heel, and stomped back upstairs. That's when I decided to call in reinforcements. First call was to our eldest daughter, Hannah. She answered on the first ring, her usual chipper voice filling the line. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "I need you here." "Now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Your mom." She hurt her head. "She's not making any sense. Bring your brothers." "Wait, what? What happened?" "I'll explain when you get here," I said, and hung up. Next, I called my son, Jake, and gave him the same spiel. He was more skeptical. "Dad, what's going on? This sounds..." "Just get here, Jake. Bring Caleb, too." Click. My last call was to Judith's parents. They weren't my favorite people, but I knew they'd come running if they thought their darling daughter was in trouble. Sure enough, her mom started shrieking into the phone while her dad barked orders in the background. Perfect. While I waited for the cavalry to arrive, I started going through Judith's things. Her purse was the jackpot. Credit cards, keys, a receipt from an email confirming a room reservation at the Marriott in Kenilworth, and a box of condoms. 12 of them. We hadn't needed them since I'd had a vasectomy 15 years ago. My jaw clenched as I shoved the receipt and condoms into my pocket. Upstairs I could hear her moving around, probably packing for her little adventure. Not while I was on duty. By the time I heard the front door swing open, I was sitting on the couch with Judith's spilled purse contents spread out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. My oldest son, Jake, walked in first, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Behind him were Caleb and Hannah, their faces twisted with concern. "What the hell is going on?" Jake asked, his eyes darting between me and the mess on the table. "Ask your mother," I said, my voice icy. Right on cue, Judith sauntered down the stairs. She was wearing a red silk dress that hugged her curves, slid high enough to leave little to the imagination. The kind of dress she never wore for me anymore. "Mom," Hannah asked, her voice shaky. "Why are you dressed like that?" Judith froze mid-step, her face pale as she realized she had an audience. "What are you all doing here?" "They're here because I called them," I said, standing. "You want to run off for the weekend with your friend William? Fine. But you're going to explain it to your kids first." Her jaw dropped. "How dare you drag them into this?" "How dare I?" I barked, stepping closer. How dare you? You were just going to walk out of here like none of this mattered. Like we didn't matter. Judith's hands clenched into fists. I'm not doing this in front of them. Oh, but you're fine doing it behind their backs? I shot back, pulling the hotel confirmation email from my pocket and tossing it on the coffee table. Here. Why don't you tell them all about your weekend getaway? Her eyes darted to the paper, and she visibly paled. David, You what? I interrupted. Didn't think I'd find out? Didn't think I'd care? Or are you just so self-absorbed that you figured I'd roll over and let you walk all over me? I don't have to explain myself to you, she snapped, her voice rising. I'm an adult. I can make my own choices. Yeah? Well, here's one for you, I said, grabbing the neckline of her dress and yanking downward. The sound of ripping fabric filled the room as the expensive silk tore in half, leaving her standing there in a lace bra, garter belt, and stockings. Dad. Hannah cried, covering her eyes. Caleb turned away, muttering, Jesus Christ, under his breath. Judith let out a high-pitched shriek, clutching the remains of her dress to her chest. You bastard. No, Judith, I said calmly. You're the bastard here. And if you think I'm going to let you walk out that door dressed like a cheap escort, you've got another thing coming. Before Judith could retort, the doorbell rang. Jake opened it, revealing Judith's parents standing on the porch. Her mother rushed in first, her eyes wide with panic. Judith, what's going on? Are you okay? She asked, glancing between me and her half-naked daughter. Judith's father followed close behind, his face hard as granite. Somebody better start talking. Glad you could make it, I said dryly. Your daughter was just about to explain her weekend plans. Weren't you, Judith? Judith's lips trembled, but she stayed silent. Her mother turned to me, her face a mix of confusion and anger. David, what are you talking about? I picked up the box of condoms from the table and tossed it to her father. Maybe you can help me figure it out. Because I sure as hell don't understand why my wife of 22 years needs these for a work trip. Her father's face darkened as he caught the box. Judith, he growled, his voice low and menacing. Is this true? Judith broke. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, the shredded remains of her dress still clutched in her hands. I'm sorry, she wailed. I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for what to happen. I pressed, my voice sharp. Didn't mean to lie to your family? Or didn't mean to screw around behind my back? Her sobs turned into hiccups, and she buried her face in her hands. Her mother knelt beside her, patting her back, while her father paced like a caged animal. Jake stepped forward, his voice cold. Mom, how long has this been going on? Judith lifted her tear-streaked face, her eyes darting between her children. It's not what you think, she pleaded. It was just one weekend. Bullshit. I snapped. You don't book 7 adjoining rooms at a Marriott for a one-time thing, Judith. Her parents stared at her, horrified. Hannah's lip quivered, and Caleb looked like he wanted to punch a hole in the wall. Jake turned to me. What now, Dad? Now, I said, we get some answers. The room was thick with tension as Judith's sobs filled the silence. Her mother continued to console her while her father stood like a stone sentinel, glaring down at his daughter. The kids were stunned, angry but unsure how to process what they were witnessing. And me? I was trying not to throw her out of the house by the hair. You better start talking, Judith, I said, my voice icy. Because this whole woe is me act isn't going to fly. She sniffled and looked up at me, mascara streaked down her face. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, she whimpered. It was just fun. Fun. Jake snapped. You call screwing around on Dad fun? What the hell is wrong with you? Watch your tone. Judith barked, but her attempt at authority fell flat. No, you watch your tone. Jake shot back. You don't get to play the victim here, Mom. You've destroyed this family for what? Some low-rent orgy with Dr. Strathmore and his groupies. Judith flinched as if slapped, but she didn't deny it. I stepped in, pointing to the email and condoms on the table. Explain this, Judith. 7 rooms at the Marriott, a dozen condoms, and God knows what else. What kind of fun were you planning to have? Her father picked up the email and read it, his face growing darker with every word. "This is disgusting," he muttered. "You were going to do this under our noses?" Her mother was crying now, shaking her head. "Judith, how could you? After everything David has done for you." Judith's voice cracked as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't plan it. It just happened. William said it would be exciting, and—" "William," I interrupted, my voice rising. "William said? So what, you just do whatever that slimy bastard tells you now?" She stammered. "It wasn't like that. He said I deserved to have some fun, that it wasn't fair for me to just be a wife and mother all the time." "Wow," Caleb said, shaking his head. "You threw away our family for that guy?" Before anyone else could speak, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker. "David Collins," a female voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Mary Strathmore." Her tone was icy and controlled. "I've been informed about what's going on with my husband, and I thought you'd like to know that he's currently sitting in the back of a police car." "Police car?" I asked, surprised. "What happened?" "He took my car without permission," she said with a dry laugh. "Claimed he had a right to it as my husband. I corrected the officers and told them my actual husband is out of town. They arrested him for unauthorized use of a vehicle. As for your wife, tell her she's next." Judith gasped. "What does that mean?" "It means, Judith," Mary snapped, "that your little fun has consequences. I've already filed for divorce, and I'm coming after everyone involved in this mess, including you. You'd better start packing." Judith crumpled further into the couch, her face pale. "David, please," she whispered. "Don't please me," I said, hanging up the call. "This is on you." As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. Caleb opened it to reveal Jerry Adams, husband of Judith's best friend and HR manager Karen Adams. He didn't look happy. "Jerry," I greeted, stepping forward. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk," he said, his eyes flicking to Judith. "Privately." "I don't think so," I said, crossing my arms. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of everyone." He sighed, then spoke. "I've been investigating the situation with the Marriott. It's worse than you think. 12 people were caught in those rooms. Doctors, nurses, and HR staff, including Karen and Judith. They were all using hospital funds to pay for the rooms, booze, and food. It's a full-blown scandal." Judith's father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Hospital funds? My daughter stole hospital funds to cheat on her husband." Jerry nodded grimly. "It's going to make the news. And when it does, careers are going to burn." Judith's mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Caleb muttered, "Unbelievable," while Hannah looked like she was about to cry. I looked at Judith, who was shaking like a leaf. "Well," I asked, "what do you have to say for yourself now?" I didn't know about the money," she stammered. "Karen said it was covered. You just what?" I snapped. "Went along with it? Didn't think about the consequences." Judith broke down into sobs again, but this time, no one rushed to comfort her. Judith sat on the couch, a broken shell of the confident woman she usually portrayed. Her sobs filled the room, but no one moved to console her. The kids stood by me, their expressions ranging from shock to outright disgust. Her parents exchanged a glance, her mother visibly torn between sympathy and anger, while her father was as rigid and silent as a judge about to pass a death sentence. "I think you should leave," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "Pack your things and go. You can figure out where to stay, but it won't be here." Judith's head snapped up. "David, please. Don't do this. We can fix it." "There's no fixing this," I interrupted. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family. You betrayed the life we built together. And for what? For some cheap thrills with that slimy bastard Strathmore and his little Zex cult." "Dad's right," Jake chimed in, his tone harsh. "You screwed up, Mom. Big time. And you don't get to play the victim now." "Jake." Judith's mother snapped. "That's your mother you're talking to. Then maybe she should have acted like one, Jake shot back. Judith's father held up a hand, silencing everyone. His gaze bore into Judith like a laser. "Get upstairs," he said in a low, commanding voice. "Pack your things and leave. We'll figure out the rest later." Judith hesitated, her eyes darting between him and me. When no one moved to defend her, she rose shakily to her feet and shuffled toward the stairs. Once Judith was out of earshot, her mother turned to me. "David, I know she's made mistakes, but don't you think this is a little extreme? You've been married for 22 years. And in those 22 years," I said, my voice steady, "I've never once betrayed her. Never even thought about it." She, on the other hand, decided our marriage wasn't worth her loyalty. Her mother started to argue, but her father cut her off. "Helen, stop." He turned to me, his expression grim. "David, I'm sorry for what she's done. She'll get no support from me until she takes responsibility for her actions." I nodded, appreciating his bluntness. "Thank you. What about us?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. "What happens to our family now?" I turned to my kids, taking a deep breath. "We'll get through this," I said firmly. "It's not going to be easy, but we'll stick together. I promise you that." Jake and Caleb nodded, their faces hard with resolve. Hannah, tears streaming down her cheeks, stepped forward and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart," I murmured, holding her close. After some time Judith reappeared, dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, her makeup smeared and her hair a mess. She carried a suitcase in one hand and her purse in the other. Her eyes were swollen, and she looked utterly defeated. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not my problem," I replied. "Maybe William can take you in, if his wife hasn't already kicked him to the curb." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She shuffled toward the door, stopping briefly to look back at the family she was leaving behind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not as sorry as you're going to be," I said coldly. She flinched but didn't respond. Her father opened the door, and without another word, she stepped outside and disappeared into the night. The fallout was as swift as it was devastating. Within days, the hospital scandal made local headlines. "Sex party scandal rocks Central Hospital," screamed the front page of the newspaper. The details were salacious enough to dominate the news cycle for weeks. Judith lost her job, along with the other nurses and doctors involved. Strathmore was fired, divorced, and later sued for embezzlement when it came out that he'd used hospital funds to finance their escapades. His wife, Mary, cleaned him out, and I wasn't far behind with my own lawsuit. I filed for divorce the next day. The process was long and painful, but in the end, I got the house, the truck, and full custody of the kids. Judith's relationship with the kids was irreparably damaged. They refused to see her, even after she tried to make amends. As for me, I rebuilt my life. I found solace in my work, leaned on my kids for support, and eventually started dating again. The betrayal still stung, but over time, the pain dulled, replaced by a sense of relief. I dodged a bullet, one that could have destroyed me if I hadn't acted when I did. Judith, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. The last I heard, she was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, barely scraping by. She'd become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what happens when you gamble with something as sacred as trust.